How's it going, guys? Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how I finished the ceiling in my garage basically for free using reclaimed wood and pallets. Now before I get started, I'm going to let you guys know that this is not going to be a car video. Most of the videos that we do make are about cars, so if you're into that kind of thing, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. We got a lot of content. We usually put out a video every week, so lots of good stuff going on there if you're into Hondas and imports and just cars in general. So with that out of the way, let's get into this. So first thing you're going to want to do is find yourself a good supply of pallets. I work for a business that uses a lot of pallets, so I basically got them all for free from work. But basically if you go to any business and just ask them, they'll probably just give them away for free because chances are they're just going to be throwing them out anyway. So that's a good place to start. Also, if you know a lot of people in construction or they're doing renovations on houses and stuff like that, you can usually pick up a bunch of scrap wood from there as well, because it's mostly stuff that's just going to be thrown in the garbage anyway, and it's good to repurpose that stuff. So every day after work I loaded up as many pallets as I could into the back of the car, and I'd bring them home and then get started taking them apart. So the easiest way to take the pallets apart I found is just to use a sawzall. So what I would do is I would just clamp it into my workbench, use a sawzall with a metal blade on it, and then just cut through the nails holding the pallet together. That was the quickest way to do it. I had tried pulling the nails out with hammer and trying to bang the boards apart, but they kept breaking on me, so I found that the sawzall was the easiest way to do it. And once you have your pallets apart, you're going to want to sort the boards out by size, because there's a lot of different styles of boards and pallets that I used anyway. If you want to use more uniform pallets, that's up to you, but I wanted to use a mix of different styles and widths. So what I did is I sorted out all the boards by width, and then that way I kept all the same sizes together. And now it's time to paint the boards. So you can do this in two different ways. I've actually done my basement with the same method as well, and what I did in the basement is I whitewashed the boards, and that way it gave them more of an aged look. And now in my garage what I did is I just did a single coat of paint, and it was a very light coat, and what that did is it allowed the wood grain to still show through, and that also gave it an aged look as well. So it's up to you which method you want to use. So to make the whitewash is very easy. It's basically just 1 part paint, 1 part water. So just mix it half and half, and make sure it's a water-based paint when you're doing that. So before painting the boards, what you're going to want to do is wipe them down really good to make sure you get any excess dirt and just debris off of them. Mine had been sitting outside for quite a while, so they had a lot of like weeds and spider webs and just dirt on them, so you want to make sure you wipe all that stuff off of there. So I just poured my paint into a little pail, and for paint brushes I just used some cheap foam brushes from the dollar store. So I went through quite a few of these because the wood is fairly rough and it does do quite a bit of damage to the brushes, but I was able to pick them up pretty cheap, so it wasn't a huge loss. But I would recommend if you can get a higher quality brush that's going to be able to withstand the rough wood, it'll probably go a lot longer way than my foam brushes did. So that's definitely something that I would change if I were to do it again. So when painting the boards, you want to make sure that you're putting a light coat of paint on. This goes for whitewashing as well, because you want the wood grain to still show through, and that kind of gives it that aged look. And then you want to make sure that you're using the brush to smooth out any of the excess paint. You don't want big globs of paint on there. You want to get a nice smooth finish on it. So now you got a bunch of boards painted. What you're going to want to do is set them aside and make sure you sort them out by size again. And it's time to move the project cars out of the way so you have room to work in the garage and you can access the ceiling. So now it's time to start nailing the boards up. So what I used was a brad nailer with 18 gauge brad nails, 2 inches long, and these worked really well to hold the boards in place, kept them really solid. So yeah, basically just go up and start nailing the boards to the ceiling. Make sure that you keep boards that are the same size in the same row. You don't want 2 different sizes in the same row because it's going to start to get really wonky and it's not going to turn out straight. I actually had a few instances where I had to use a different size in the row, just because the boards were so warped and it wasn't turning out very straight. So when I had to correct it, in some cases I would have to put a little bit of a wider board in there just to straighten it back out again. But you kind of have to make it up as you go. It's almost like putting a big puzzle together, but it's a lot of fun to do it. And after nailing up the boards, always make sure that you test it out to make sure it's solid. Because I don't know about you, but I really don't want any boards falling off the ceiling. So once you get to the end of your row, you're gonna have to cut the board to size. So basically just bring the full-size board up there, put it up against the gap that you need to fill, draw your line and then cut it to size, and then nail it up there. But always keep in mind where your studs are, because you don't want to end up in a spot where there's no stud left. So if you do need to make a shorter piece and you don't have a stud right at the end of the wall, you're gonna have to use a shorter piece in the middle of the row somewhere so that you can use the longer piece near the end. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you can't put a board up because there's nothing to nail it to. So basically keep going like that until you start filling up the ceiling. Eventually, if you're like me, you have a garage door opener, which you're gonna have to cut around. So basically just bring your board up and then put your marks on it where you need to cut around. And then I used a drill and a jigsaw to cut the pieces out that I needed. And then I was able to make it fit quite easily. And again, you want to make sure you keep in mind where your studs are, because you need to be able to nail it to something. So always be mindful of that. You almost got to think in advance to make sure that you're going to be hitting the studs every time, because like I said, you don't want to be stuck with no place to nail to. So keep going like this and nailing boards up. What I ended up doing is I started at each side of the garage. So what I did is I started on one side, got quite far, and then I started on the other side of the garage so that I could meet in the middle. The reason that I did this is because if your gap isn't 100% straight once you get to the end, it's going to be very noticeable if it's right up against a wall. So what I did is I started on both sides and then I was going to meet in the middle, and then that way when I'm filling in the seam, it's not going to be as noticeable because it's in the middle of the ceiling somewhere, not right up against where the ceiling meets the wall. So once you get to the point where both sides meet, you're going to have a little bit of a gap that you got to fill. For me, I only had about a 1.5 inch gap that I had to fill in. So rather than trying to find a board that skinny to fill in the gap, what I did is I found a piece of pine paneling, or try using the thinnest board that you have, and then just cover the gap over top, and that's going to hide it very well. This is a very simple way to fill the gap in, and it's not even noticeable unless you're really looking for it. But I just found it was the best way to do it rather than trying to find a board that exact size to fill the gap. And especially if your gap isn't 100% straight, maybe on one side of the garage it's 1 inch and on the other side of the garage it's 2 inches, and you got to try and fill that in and make it look good, it's going to be very difficult to do. But if you're just covering the gap with a thin board, then it's going to be perfectly straight all the way across and you're not even going to notice. So yeah guys, that's basically it. It's a fairly simple process. It just takes a lot of time to do it. With gathering the pallets, cutting them up, painting them, and putting them up. It's a lot of trips up and down the ladder, but I really enjoy the way that it looks, and the fact that I basically did it for free. My only expense was basically the paint and the paint brushes. Everything else was basically free. So considering I couldn't really buy drywall or get a drywall lift that would go as high as my ceiling, this was the best alternative for me. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you got something out of it. Make sure, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button below. Definitely leave me a comment as well. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.